Perfect. Okay, we'll get started. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. It's much appreciated. And today's webinar is all going to be all about the European Accessibility Act. This digital law comes into play this Saturday. There's a lot to talk about and understand. So we're excited to have a nice panel of guests here to explore the topic and support you on your compliance EAA journey. Perfect. Right, let's dive into some introductions and see who we have on our panel today. John, should we start off your good self?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm John Abbott. I'm head of product at Recite Me. I look after all our products, some of which you will know, like our toolbar and our checker, and some of the more experimental things that are coming along in the pipeline. So today I'm sat in the Gateshead office. I'm wearing a blue jumper, and I have a blue checked shirt on, and I'm really pleased to be here with everybody.
Thank you, John. Kirsty?
Hi, I'm Kirsty Hames, and I'm a senior front-end developer at Kineo, a leading company in digital learning. I'm fair-skinned, freckly, with glasses and blondish hair, and I'm wearing quite a vibrant, funky fleece today.
Thank you, Kirsty. Chris?
Thank you. So I'm Chris. I'm head of accessibility at Recite Me. I'm wearing a dark blue shirt. I've got short brown hair, and I'm actually down in my home office. I've got the air conditioning on now, which is good. Managed to fend off the rain. So I look after a lot of the digital consultancy, accessibility consultancy going through Recite Me, but also I feed into a lot of the team that we look after, obviously, the accessibility and the content that goes out to clients as well. So relatively new to the role, so I'm being looked after by John and Michael. Also, very much looking forward to going through the EAA with you today.
Thank you. I forgot my introduction. How rude. Apologies. My name is Michael Halpin. I'm head of marketing here at Recite Me. I'm white-skinned, brown spiky hair, and I have a blue collared jacket on. Thank you very much. Before we for people who may not know who Recite Me is a lived experience founder-led organization by Ross Linnett, who was diagnosed with dyslexia and has made his mission to make the digital world as accessible as possible. And here at Recite Me, we do this through a number of products and services, from our toolbar to enhance user experience with over 7 million annual users, our accessibility checker to support organizations in designing and coding and making their websites accessibility compliant. And to bring this all together, we offer services from auditing, documentation, and training to create a full digital accessibility platform to help organizations to become accessible and compliant. Right, with that shameless plug out the way, let's dive into the main subject of the EAA. Chris, I'll share my screen and I'll let you kick us off with what is the EAA?
Brilliant, thanks, Michael. I think probably the main premise of today is we've been talking about the EAA for a very long time, and obviously we're creeping up to that Saturday, where obviously the date's coming in, and I think for us it's just there's a few people I've spoken to recently are kind of saying, well, look, we're nearly there, but perhaps we just didn't quite have enough time to get the things in that we wanted to, or perhaps we're building that experience. So for us, have you been caught out? I think main thing is you're on the call today. What we're going to walk through is kind of some of those things that you can look at, but also hopefully that gives you a little bit of confidence to go away and use the tools that we're going to walk through and bring that in. So for us, why build an inclusive and accessible website? I think the main thing here, we are focusing on people. Okay, first of all, it's the right thing to do. Okay, we need to make sure that everybody has an opportunity and access content and digital content that they need. We're going to talk a little bit around some of those on the webinar today, but I think for us, it's also a really smart business practice for you to kind of embed accessibility in. So that's things like provide accessible website, increases web traffic, and just that general engagement, because for us, it's required by the law. So you've obviously got the rules coming in on the 28th. So for us, there's obviously going to be different rules that go across different territories or different state nations. So I think for us as well, it's one of those things that we're doing across our businesses as well. For us, there's a huge variety of different people, the way they consume information and content. But for us, who needs support online? Over 135 million people in Europe live with some form of disability. That could be visible, that could be invisible, it could be temporary, for example, it could be a permanent long-term condition. There's also over 30 million people in Europe that have a vision impairment. Okay, so a lot of the process that we're going through here, we need to make sure that we're building content that supports vision impairment. Over 15 million of the people that are in Europe have some form of learning disability or difficulty. I'm actually one of those. So for me, I've got a little bit of lived experience around how that kind of meets into the standards. But I think for us, we're talking big numbers. And the last one I've got on the screen, over 14% of Europe don't speak the official language of the country that they live in. So that could be going to a site and not being able to translate your known language. I've had some conversations this morning around, putting imagery on their site that's written in a different language, not being able to translate it. So we're seeing some of these things coming through. Can I have the next slide, please, Michael?
Of course, yeah.
Excellent. And for us, it's about, bringing this into business. It's a smart thing to do. It should be the way that you should be doing everything. For us, there's a few benefits to that. One is that we attract a wider audience. Okay, inclusion expands your customer base by enabling 135 million people with disabilities in Europe. 100 billion euros spending power, significant amount of money. That's the collective spending power of people with a disability or disabilities. And it's often referred to as the purple pound or the purple euro, or the click away pound. Effectively, people coming to your site, not being able to use it and potentially going off to a different site that is more inclusive, or just abandoning what they're doing fully, and that's not where we need to be. It boosts brand reputation. Okay, so we're looking at commitment to accessibility enhances. So what we're doing here is we're enhancing the diversity of our workforce, making sure that our workplaces are able to support everybody, regardless of whether they need information slightly differently or they work slightly differently. And obviously, in turn, if you've got employees that are happier working, they're able to work to the best of their ability, then that supports customer loyalty as well. That's a really powerful thing. What is the EAA? So we've heard a lot about it. I'm just going to give you a little bit of a recap on what that actually stands for. So we may have people on the call today that have been very familiar with it. May have people that this is perhaps something they've not heard of for a while, or this is maybe even one of the first calls you're having. So the European Accessibility Act 2025, it ensures digital access for all. It applies to products, services, and websites. Okay, so note the products piece there. It harmonizes accessibility standards across the EU, all on the same boat. We use the same information there. It mandates removal of digital barriers. Okay, so that could be an inclusion barrier, and it boosts inclusive in market. It's also a legal requirement for business and services. The amount that it covers. If I could have the next slide, please, Michael. Kind of what we're looking at, and this is what we're aiming to achieve. So this is an extract from the derivative. I'm going to read it out, okay, so it just makes sense. So to ensure accessibility, products and services are perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. People can perceive content, operate interfaces, understand information, and are able to trust that assistive technologies are compatible. And that's going to play very closely into what John's going to talk to you about in a little while. You may notice a little bit of a reference there, perhaps WCAG or Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Okay, so if I could have the next slide. Who does the EAA apply to? Okay, I would love to say everybody, okay, but there are some obviously and some standards around that. So who does it apply to? Applies to organizations within EU, but also those trading into the EU. That includes perhaps businesses selling or operating digital services, if they're selling or their customer base is in the EU. It applies to private sector organizations. So if you have, for example, more than 10 employees or an annual turnover of over 2 million euros, then that's this. The premise is split into a couple of different areas: digital product and services. So this includes things like websites, mobile apps, e-commerce platforms, software as a service or SaaS platforms, self-service tools. So these are things like kiosks, travel kiosks as a very good example there. Ticketing, recruitment platforms, and job boards. So it's quite broad. However, when you look at what we are covering with it, it's most of the key functionality that you're trying to solve. So things like travel, education, finance, banking, everything that covers e-commerce as well. So hopefully that kind of gives you a very good understanding there. If I could have the next slide, Michael. So this is the magic slide. When does the EAA go into effect? Okay, so it's from the 28th of 2025. So we are there, and all new content and services must be fully compliant after that date. Okay, so it is on a Saturday. It's this coming Saturday. Also, there is obviously a transitional period as well. So if you had a product that's existing already, it doesn't need any significant enhancements or changes. There is a transactional period until 28th of June 2030. Okay, and that involves anything that's kind of legacy before that. If you're going to make significant changes to your platform, i.e. the key functionality, you're going to change the whole design, that's when we start to look at the fact that it becomes new content and it needs to be accessible and meet the EAA regulations before going live. Okay, so hopefully that kind of gives you an idea. The risks of non-compliance, well, I think the main thing for us is you're cutting people out from actually being able to access digital content. That's the main thing that we're looking at. But there are obviously some other compliance issues. So things like you will have legal penalties coming in around this. So they do differ slightly from different countries within the EU, but there are legal penalties. Brand reputational damage. Okay, if you are selling something into a country and not inclusive, then for us, obviously, you're going to have reputational damage, regardless. Something that is, I would love to see people avoiding that and actually just building inclusive and accessible content. There is regulatory scrutiny and obviously things like market access limitations. So we're talking about things like procurement. Okay, so if you're procuring for a contract going into the EU, for example, and what you're providing doesn't meet the regulations, I think you're very quickly going to start seeing yourself not being included in some of those conversations, winning work, but you may also start losing contracts as well. So there are going to be limitations perhaps going into different markets, but also you've got that customer and employee dissatisfaction. Okay, that's what we're really here for. We make sure that people are able to access the content. If I could have the next slide, please, Michael. I'm going to pass over to John, and I think John's going to talk to us a little bit about what the web content accessibility guidelines are. So if I hand over to John.
Great, thank you. So I get the fun bit. What is WCAG? And when you talk about WCAG, sometimes there's a little groan in the room of like, oh, what is that? You may hear it sort of described a few different ways. We internally call it WCAG. Some people call it WCAG or the WCAG guidelines, but they all stand for the same thing. So it's a title set by the W3C, who I guess control the internet, and it stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So I'd highly recommend, if you've never seen them before, give them a quick Google, and you'll suddenly realize that the information contained maybe is a little bit hard to digest at first. So what we spend a bit of time doing is trying to break it down to make it a little bit easier to understand, and to get to grips with some of the different aspects of it. But at a very high level, what they try and achieve is a broad base standard of accessibility that most people can achieve. So if you're an organization and you have a website, and you have either in-house developers or you have a team that work with you, these are achievable things that you can actually do to help improve the accessibility of your site. So it's broken down into different levels. They have level A, level AA, and level AAA. And we sort of break those down into, I guess, different aspiration goals. So generally speaking, people try and aim for around about the AA level, but we split them out to try and understand the difference between each of them. So single A, we call those the must-dos. They're the absolute non-negotiables. AA, we suggest are should-dos, and most of the customers we talk to are aiming for AA standard. AAA fall into the you could do them. And in terms of an aspirational goal, you should certainly look at them and try and understand what they entail and why they are the way they are. It's worth saying that the further you get into AAA, sometimes there are trade-offs in other areas. So you want to look at things like a brand and how does your brand work with things like AAA guidelines and AA guidelines. So you get that sweet spot between achieving accessibility, but also being able to communicate what your organization does. Yeah, so we thought it'd be easy if we gave you a few examples. Everybody's heard of WCAG, but what does that actually mean in practice? So we did a rummage around the Recite Me accessibility checker, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But we have a tool that helps identify common WCAG issues on websites. We came out with the top 5. So number 1 is alt text on images. So this is primarily for things like screen readers. Sometimes when you put an image on a site, great if you can see it, but if you're trying to use a screen reader, there's no way for the screen reader to know what's in that image. So it's a really simple fix in your line of code. It's a 2-minute job for a developer to be able to add a descriptive image, and suddenly everybody now knows what's in that image. Color contrast is one of those things that catches a lot of people out. Sometimes you put, you've got your brand template and you think, oh, these colors look great, but by the time you put a certain text on a certain background, the contrast ratios are not high enough to be viewed by people with low vision. So WCAG itself actually gives you ratios, and we have a color contrast tool you can check if you ever find yourself not sure. You can put foreground colors and background colors in and just check those ratios, and you get a nice big tick when you know that you've passed the minimum. Simple things like page titles. You wouldn't believe the number of people that manage to publish a page without having a page title in there. It's easily done if you're using things like content management systems and it's not a required field. But very quickly, that gets really annoying if people are trying to use screen readers to work out what is actually on this page without me having to scroll through paragraphs and paragraphs. So yeah, easy fix, a very quick line of code. Empty links. This is a really interesting one because not many people realize why these even exist. It is possible when you start looking in source code and you're thinking, why would somebody have actually put an empty link on a page? And there are lots of reasons people do it, but it tends to be a stylistic thing. Sometimes you get icons that you can see visually, but when you actually examine the source code, there's nothing there for a screen reader to hook onto. So there are some really simple tags you can add just to make sure that link can be described to anybody who's trying to access it, not just visually, but also using screen readers. And relatedly, missing language tags. You may know that your website's in English, but not everybody does. And especially if you are working in Europe and you're working in different languages, there is very simple bits of markup you can add to your page just to say, look, this page is in French or this page is in Spanish, in order that somebody coming along with a screen reader quickly gets the right information in the right language. So how does Recite Me help with WCAG? Worth saying that many people know Recite Me as a toolbar company. Our toolbar is used on websites right around the world. There came a point where customers said to us, thank you for everything you do to help with our inclusion. We also have this other challenge, and it's called WCAG. what can you do to help us? So we built a set of tools to help people, and these are all customer led. So every issue that you're facing in your organization, there's a very good chance that somebody's reported it to us and that we're trying to solve that exact problem. So what you can see on the screen is the Recite Me accessibility checker. Quite a simple tool that tries to do as much automated identification of issues as possible. It checks the source code on your site and tries to pull out those things that if you've got a really big real estate, like you've got, thousands, tens of thousands of pages, it isn't always feasible to go through and manually check all of those. So the checker can do that in the background for you. And we have a little bit of AI in there to do more automation. So less about making it completely AI driven so that nobody knows what's happening, but using that AI where it's sensible to help identify issues that can be fixed. But it's not just the checker. We have a few other tools you can use as well. And again, these have all been developed in conjunction with our customers to solve their WCAG issues. So we also have a Chrome extension, which is super handy if you're trying to check individual pages. Chris mentioned there about making sure that your future content is updated and compliant. And the Chrome extension is a really easy way to run some really basic accessibility checks on a page that you might be working on. Accessibility feedback form does form part of the requirements for the European Accessibility Act. We have a really simple plugin if you need something like that. And it just gives people a way of being able to say, actually, look, I think I've got a problem on this page. Can I report it to you in order that maybe you can do something about that? Accessibility statement. This is your friend. An accessibility statement is a really honest place to be able to say where you are, where you're up to, and what comes next. And we have templates that you can use if you're not familiar with how they work. And also, I mentioned it before, a contrast checker. Really simple. If you have some designers in your team or you're developing promotional campaigns, it takes 2 minutes just to check the contrast of the text on the background, just to make sure it's hitting those minimum guidelines. And it would be remiss of me if I didn't mention that human audits are a really cool part of our offering now. Chris and his team now lead those audits, and it's a really great way to get validation of all the efforts that you've gone to when you get to the end and you've got a team of experts can say, actually, you've done a really great job here.
Perfect. Thank you very much, John. Much appreciated. I think we've learned a lot about the EAA and what WCAG is. I'm sure there's a ton more to learn for everyone on the call, but let's hand it up to Kirsty and see what this all looks like in real life from a developer, which would be fantastic. So Kirsty, I'll hand it over to your good self.
Thank you. So why shouldn't accessibility be left until the end of a project? So just to revisit one of those statistics shared earlier, over 135 million people in Europe live with some form of disability. So this represents about 1 in 4 adults. So that's already quite a lot of people we need to consider. So it can be costly to retrofit accessibility. So it's the resource required to implement, test and fix issues. And, this needs to be budgeted for. And forgetting about this could delay project timelines. The testing alone can be quite time consuming, especially if you're having to test across numerous tools. And ultimately, a patch fix might resolve an accessibility issue, but it might not be the best implementation, especially when we talk about designing with accessibility in mind. So this can lead to poor user experience, potentially creating barriers for users with disabilities, which then has a risk of legal implications and potential lawsuits. And this is going to impact on reputation. So shows a lack of care and consideration for users and, risking loss of user base and revenue through non-compliance. Thanks, Michael. Okay, so what are some of the simple ways to start embedding accessibility into your day-to-day work? So kind of why we're here today, training. So whether that's knowledge of legislation and how that applies to yourselves, or the skills to implement accessibility. So whether you have existing skills in-house and you're able to knowledge share, or you need to seek external expertise for accessibility training and consultancy, such as the experts at Recite Me. Regularly audit your services and products for accessibility. Again, whether you have the in-house capabilities or you're using external expertise. And we've kind of already mentioned that it's, there's a mix of automated tools, so you can quickly analyze things such as color contrast, use of alt text, accessible code, but you want the manual testing for things like keyboard navigation or screen reader support. If you're using off-the-shelf products, is there an accessibility conformance report, sometimes known as VPATs? So these provide a summary on compliance. And consider including accessibility as a requirement in your procurement contract. So again, if accessibility issues occur, these are things which you can pass on to the vendors. I've worked with clients where they've used both external auditors as well as their own internal testing team to ensure conformance for the digital learning we've provided the client. And the auditors provide us with the reports, which is great. It's valuable insight, which helps us improve our products also. User-centered design. So if you can, involve diverse users, including people with disabilities in both the design process and the user testing. Plan and budget for accessibility in your project. So consider the time and the resource for both the implementation as well as the testing. So like for me, depending on the complexity of a project, if I know there's an accessibility requirement, I include additional time in my estimates to cover the initial work as well as any time needed for amends for when we do accessibility testing. And as well, like plan what stage of a project you're going to accessibility test. So as we've mentioned, it's accessibility applies to the visual appearance, the content and the functionality. So as an example, it would be a bit of a wasted effort to screen reader to test with a screen reader if you've only included kind of like dummy text like lorem ipsum. It's also not a very pleasant experience either for the person who has to test that. But accessibility testing can be extensive, so you could break this down into different stages if that makes it easier. So if I'm kind of developing any new functionality, I kind of do the keyboard and screen reader testing up front whilst I'm developing to kind of catch any issues early. Whereas for content, you kind of want to test that later on once the content's kind of been more finalized and signed off. And things like color contrast, you can be testing this early when creating the artwork before you've even started to build anything. So as again kind of mentioned earlier with the different contrast ratios, but it's quite common for branding to include colors what don't contrast well together. And this is mostly due to a lot of brands were, created before we were really thinking about accessibility. So again, you might have to tweak some of those colours or just the combination of how you're using those colours. Prioritise. So as well as prioritising accessibility in the planning and development of your project, when it comes to auditing and accessibility feedback, I think what really helps is identifying the quick wins, so less involved fixes that can be directly addressed versus issues that kind of require either wider input or perhaps a more costly solution. But still, these are things they can start to form an accessibility roadmap, which kind of feeds into the last point, the continuous improvement. So this is an ongoing process. Regularly review, update your content and your products. The training's ongoing, and just keeping yourselves up to date with best practices. Have the next slide, please, Michael. Thank you. So what are some of the benefits of prioritising accessibility? So a big one is the improved user experience. So everyone benefits. It's not just people who identify to have a disability. Accessible sites are often easier and faster to use. Improved user experience, it increases engagement and satisfaction. And a lot of the accessible features now are widely used. For me personally, like I really struggle with bright white screens. So I have dark theme enabled on all my applications for work because, high contrast themes, they can really help with readability. Video captions are useful in noisy environments if you can't play audio out loud. And providing media transcripts, again, you're also supporting those with low or no bandwidth if people can't play video. So ultimately, you're supporting users with temporary or situational disabilities as well as permanent. And some of these points kind of Chris mentioned earlier as well when he was discussing smart business, but you have a social responsibility. So by prioritising accessibility, you're showing a commitment to inclusivity, and that enhances brand reputation. So by providing equal access to your products and services, it sends a really powerful message that you value diversity, and that increases customer loyalty, which that leads to your business growth and your sorry, voice breaking up, leads to business growth and increased visibility. So some of the accessibility practices we mentioned, like providing alternative text for images. So this improves your search engine optimization. And just by supporting more users, you're expanding your market reach, your impact. And again, just to pick up on one of the statistics shared earlier, it's worth 100 billion plus euros in spending power. So kind of why wouldn't you want to tap into that? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, everyone, for going through that. I think working in marketing, we're fixated on website performance, SEO, getting new clients, and then as I've been in this industry with all these amazing people with accessibility, the two worlds are starting to come closer together. Business goals, marketing goals, who we're trying to target, the user experience in the middle, and the outcome. That their accessibility is now a key pillar of that process, of business process, from the audience and the spending power to the ease of the experience and the ease of outcome from entering a website, and then obviously the brand reputation and helping people. It's all coming together. Is something of a key pillar that every organization really should be taking note. With that being said, Chris, where does everyone start with all this? There's so much discussed and things mentioned. What should people do first?
Well, Mike, we've got a really good list. I think that's a good starting point. So I think probably when we look at it from that holistic view, it can be really overwhelming. So, for me, I've been in the industry now for a long time. I've been through most of the processes. I've seen some of this shape, and obviously I've seen how we've started to do what you said, Michael, is start to think about those people first, as opposed to it's not just a product that's just being sold out and just being built and pushed out. So I think probably for us, one of the things that I would really sort of urge people to really do is actually focus on that people aspect. Accessibility, it benefits everybody. Okay, so we look at a lot of the tools come in. They all come in eventually find that closed captions benefit everybody. Okay, even though they perhaps would have been for somebody with hearing impairment or deaf. So I think that's kind of the messages. A lot of the things that are coming in, they benefit everybody. Now, the list I've got on the screen, I am going to break it down a little bit because quite a lot of wording on here. And some of this you may already have done. So I'll say if we can go through these, I think the starting point is trying to assess where you are. So it's things like audit key platforms. Don't just leave platforms in the corner. Think, do you know what? We'll deal with that later. Get them out on the table. Really start looking at your auditing processes. So this is things like your websites, your apps. If you've got the opportunity to do so, deploy the toolbar. The toolbar will come along and it will help with just some of those areas that you need a little bit of help with. Okay, so it comes onto your website, and it does help with a little bit of customization. It doesn't fix everything, but actually it does help. So for us, audit key platforms, get familiar with them. Another one is around automated scans. Now, what we tend to find is auditing seems to be that focus of you do it at the end, or you do it once and then you never do it again. It's completely the opposite. So what we should be doing is continually running automated testing, continually checking in with real people when they use the software, your websites, but also don't just do it once, park it up and never go back to it. It's about continually getting better at this. So automate scans, get that benchmark of performance. And do you know what? Be completely honest with yourself. I think that's what a lot of people are scared around, is they've not met the standards, that actually it's a negative thing. Yes, you are excluded, get better, but you need to have that benchmark start you off. And that means a little bit of honesty. So if you're hitting most of the A, you're not quite there with AA yet, but actually you're getting there, that's huge to have that sort of thing, or that information in your accessibility statement, and really let what's going on with your websites. One that many people do, they focus on the person or the team in their firm that are digital accessibility specialists. It needs complete difference. So what we need to be doing is bringing together cross-functional teams, cross departments, getting people together into conversation, and that means including from the legal team, check whether your website is a service or if it's a product, whether it's part of the EAA, whether it's not, but also looking at things like getting your design teams in. So Kirsty talked about the designs with real people right at the beginning, because actually you might find things like the button put somewhere actually is completely the wrong place, and it meets all of the WCAG standard or whatever standards you have in your area, but actually it's still not usable. So actually it's about really looking at that, bringing in design teams, get your developers in, make sure that they're part of the fix. Not a case of they just get a given audit told to fix. It's about bringing people in, and actually that development process becomes part of a wider thing. So John, we do it in our teams. We have a very clear process that if something new comes in, or we're going to tweak something, accessibility gets tested, part of that process, right from the beginning, right through to when it gets deployed out into our live products. So it is a continual thing. Prioritize and fix critical blockers. You might have existing complaints or people that are really struggling with your sites. Really focus on what they're talking about. Okay, listen, have conversations with people, really understand how they're using your sites, but prioritize and look at some of those fixes, because some of them, when I'm talking about critical blockers, it could be that somebody's coming onto your site, they're not able to navigate to ask for help on your site because it's not accessible. It might be that you've got forms all throughout your site that don't have the appropriate labels. Somebody that's vision impaired or perhaps using a keyboard, it's completely useless, they can't use it. So it's also things like you've got assistive technologies or a screen reader coming through your site. What you don't want to be doing is bringing things into your site that then impact how compatible your site is with their technology. Okay, so it's about really looking at that. I think Kirsty talked about this, is reviewing suppliers for accessibility guarantees. Hold suppliers, hold third parties accountable. And the reason why I say that is because as an organization, you are responsible for the third parties, the suppliers, the vendors that you choose to then come and represent you on your platforms or your websites. So if you have a third party, for example, that isn't interested in doing accessibility fixing and not interested in it, I think it might be time to, or perhaps look at alternatives, because effectively they will have a negative effect on your EAA compliance, but also just that ongoing strategy around making tools, accessibility part of your process. So get reviewing suppliers, have a centralized log, understand who you're buying from, ask for statements, get familiar with reading them, share the statements with your legal teams, do have them, or with legal representation to make sure that everybody's clear. If you are signing new contracts or bringing vendors, ask the questions up front. Can you demonstrate accessibility in your processes? Do you have a VPAT or voluntary accessibility, product accessibility template, or an ACR, okay, which is a complete VPAT? Are their clients or are their staff actually buying into what their organization is selling to? That's a really good help. There's other things you can do. Okay, so we can train core staff. Okay, so making sure that, again, it goes back to don't just rely on an accessibility specialist. Something that accessibility becomes part of everybody's role. It doesn't necessarily need to be called out, but it should be part of the thing that people do as they go through their role. So train core teams, developers, do they understand how to do a keyboard accessibility test and why? And that's the key to it, is why are we doing this? Design teams, again, why are we looking at colors? Why is it that we need to change our brand colors? Do they understand why that is? Through to, like we said, procurement, getting that really familiar. Maybe it's actually that you've got so many third parties that actually that makes it more inaccessible, because you're struggling to get some buy-in from different vendors because you're only using a small part of their site. Is it that you can perhaps consolidate some of the tools and third parties that you're using to make more impact in one place? It's about bringing some of them into a central point. It's probably one of my favorite ones, and people forget this one, is document your process. Okay, celebrate. Somebody's doing something really well in your firm, or you've made a significant in improving access. Celebrate it, document what's been done, but also it's really important that you're keeping things like your accessibility statement up to date. Okay, so if you do tweak something, or I don't know, one of your sprints doesn't quite go to plan, and actually that happens, it's about making sure that you're really transparent on your accessibility statements. Okay, and it's calling out some of the things. A lot of people worry about putting that sort of information on an accessibility statement. You are more likely to be in trouble. And obviously, from a transparency perspective, if you're not putting things onto an accessibility statement than you are if you're really transparent, open and honest, but have a really actionable plan coming out of that. Okay, document fixes. Okay, the reason why I say that is because staff move. Okay, you may have staff come in that are brilliant, they know what they're doing. They may be off, maybe somebody else coming into the team, you may be expanding, whatever it is. People leave firms too. Have you lost that knowledge that's actually in that team? So document the fixes so that actually, if that does happen, you've got a really good process that can pick up where we left and carry on and bring in those fixes, making sure that you are developing correctly. Timelines are really important. Okay, if somebody has an open complaint with your organization, don't just leave them hanging. The worst thing to do. It means that person doesn't know what's going on. You probably don't know in the same case. If you have a complaint or somebody coming in, or you've got new fixes coming in, it's really important that you're showing those timelines of progression. And obviously that can also go into your accessibility statement if you want to, but it's about showing that roadmap of improvement. And obviously that's supported by policies. Have you got policies in your firm that are really edged towards we are creating inclusive content as opposed to just trying to get things out? And that may be the policy is that pushback, that gentle pushback to go, why are we rushing the product out the door without doing all the proper tests? Setting that expectation with a policy can help with, we must do this, got to do this, and before it goes live, it's got to be accessible. That's where you need policies to come in and just make sure that you're doing that as part of the process. I think Michael's also mentioned it as well. You don't want a site or a product or a service sat there that people can't tell you what's wrong with. Okay, so making sure, and this is one of the things that the EAA specifically call out, is that we're looking at how do we get feedback in, and a really, really sort of slick process, an inclusive process that allows somebody to submit guidance, feedback, maybe raise a complaint if they're not finding the service accessible. I don't know, you may have just put something out as an update, it didn't quite go to plan, but you need feedback. So you need to have something on your site so it's really accessible to get to, but also gives the opportunity for people to be honest with the feedback coming in. You'll learn a huge amount from that. And obviously the key to that is go and have those conversations with people. If that means bringing people into your firm, if they're okay to do that, have an interview with them, ask them what could be improved. And it goes back to, like we said, around timelines. If you are having conversations with people and you've got fixes coming up, open and honest on your accessibility statement, but tell people what's coming up. So it does make a little bit of difference. So I know it's a very sort of broad list in terms of what we're doing. You may find that you're doing quite a few of these without realizing, okay, but maybe your next task is to go, here's the list. Can we pick off the ones that we are doing really well, and just being really open and honest with ourselves, and then looking at the next steps. But I would definitely look at kind of not shoving things under, brushing things under the carpet, not ignoring things, and just bringing things out really open on the table and working. But hopefully that's helped. And I've talked a lot, so I'm going to hand back to Michael.
No, that's perfect. Thank you very much, Chris. I think there is a lot to go through and a lot of steps. But I think what we see here at Recite, if you start a day and put that 1 foot forward, the first domino falls, you're more accessible than you were yesterday. I think it's all about that starting on the good foot and baking it into the processes that you have. I am conscious of time. It's been a lot of information, but there is some questions. So what I think I'll do is I'll quickly just fire up the questions, ask a few for the audience, from the audience, apologies, and then we go from there. Okie right, okay. I see the importance of accessibility, both morally and from a business point of view, but my B2B company does not and won't give budget for this. Is accessibility important for B2B websites?
I can take that
Chris?
one if it helps. I'm going to be slightly biased this one because obviously, you know, the area that we sit in, from that compliance perspective and accessibility, I would say yes, it is very important. Probably from my side is how do you get that sponsorship, and that could be quite a difficult thing to do. So we do have, I think we've got a couple of bits of information around a framework to help you perhaps line up some of those conversations with senior stakeholders and help support you a little bit with some of the common things, the themes that we find that can help you sort of, you know, move towards getting some kind of budget. Now, one of the things that I am aware of is accessibility doesn't always have to cost. Okay, so one of the things that I've seen over the years is if you ignore accessibility, it's going to come back and it's probably going to cost you at least 300% more if you're doing it as a remediation task later down the line, as opposed to just doing it when you're in the moment. Okay, so there is that kind of technical debt that you do carry, that burden of cost. If you do or something, it will come back later. You're only going to have to fix it another day. So for me, it's like if you do it up front, get it done early on in that process, they're not going to have to visit later, and it's going to cost you a lot less to remediate and repair it. Also from the legal perspective as well, not got that coming in your shape. But also from my perspective, there's a lot of things you can do that don't cost. So things like a screen walkthrough, just taking what you've got, somebody that's actually going to be, you know, in that position to kind of identify budget and actually showing people what the barrier is. I had a website I audited a long while ago where actually the whole point of this website was something you had to click a button on the screen, and the button was hidden at the bottom of the screen, and you could get to it with a keyboard, and you certainly couldn't do it with a screen reader, and it was difficult to find. And what we did to approach that was a couple of screen recordings, cost anything that we used NVDA screen reader, walked through, recorded what it looked like, and then actually took that to leadership, went, this is what the barrier is, and actually they just didn't understand it until we'd shown them. So I think a lot of it is bringing in some of those the context around it, and you'll find sometimes that will help with some of the budget along a little bit.
Appreciate that, Chris. I'm just flying through the chat, and there's lots and lots and lots of comments, which is awesome and things. One thing that people are after is support and help. So I just want to say, if you head over to the Recite Me website, at the top there's a yellow bar that says EAA. Click that button, and what you'll find there is an EAA checklist, a guide that you can download, a training course, a color contrast checker, accessibility statement templates, VPAT templates, lots and lots of free resources that you can download and then take that on board and see how you can adapt that for your organization. Another thing about budget is we have a business case template on the website as well. This is asks all them questions that Chris was saying, evidence-based information that then you can feed up to higher sort of stakeholders and to try and get that budget. There's information about the dates, Chris and John, around the after the 20th, what's new content, what's legacy. I think that's a topic that everyone's trying to discuss, because it's not like a black and white thing that's being said. They say, am I right in saying they say substantial or a large bit of new content of work? But that hasn't been mentioned about pages, or it has to be over 10 pages. I suppose it's best practice, from my opinion, that if our team is putting out new content, obviously we'll use John's Chrome extension to check that new content's accessible, then we will put it live. What any extra information is the last thing there to support?
Let me jump in then. So yes, so there is a transition period, and the transition period is to help you. What we sometimes find is lots of people jump in and go, this is too overwhelming. I don't know whether to do my old stuff or my new stuff. So best advice is put a best foot forward and go, my new stuff will always be accessible from here on in. And my mindset from next week is it's a team effort, and we're going to do it together. The best thing I can advise is the accessibility statement is your friend. It is the very best place to put everything you're thinking about accessibility, and to make those distinctions, to say, did you know that we as an organization, we are putting our future content, and we're making that accessible, and here's what our plan is for our legacy content. So just the process of communicating that helps get the organization on the right foot. And last bit of advice is, some accessibility statements are incredibly boring. Have a look at a contrast between your About Us page and how you describe your organization and how you describe your accessibility statement, because the personality in one should translate to both of those. So if you could take away one thing, it would be, let that accessibility statement really show off the best of your organization.
Thank you, John. And I think from a legacy perspective, we all have had that burden, if you like. Even here at Recite Me, we had to look through all our thousands of blogs that we've created. And what we do is, what we talk to our clients about is, we need to understand and bite-size this legacy content. What's most important? Golden journeys, templates, how your website's built, the most high traffic website pages. How can we look at what is the most important for our organization, and then therefore would be the most important for our audience? So for instance, ticketing from the homepage to the checkout, that needs to be looked at as a priority. Or you've got template pages that are very much, is what it says in the tin, a template. If there's 10, let's look at them 10 templates first, and hopefully that'll have a knock-on effect of hundreds of pages. We need to think smartly when it comes to legacy. That doesn't feel overwhelming, but we're going to get a bang for our buck. But that's something that you'll see on the Recite Me website, and when you speak to experts like Chris, John, and Kirsty. I'm conscious it's an hour now. Have we got anything else to say, or should we let the good people go and we can follow up with some emails after the back of it? Anything else, lasting comments from anyone? Perfect. Well, I much appreciate everyone today, our panelists and everyone on the call. Have a fantastic week. Take care, and we'll speak again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.